On a cold morning in October of 2018, the news flashed across America like lightning striking a dying tree. Sears, the company that had once been woven into the very fabric of American life, filed for bankruptcy. 125 years of history, reduced to a legal filing in a New York courtroom. 70,000 workers woke up that Monday morning to an uncertain future, their coffee growing cold as they read the headlines on their phones. 700 stores, once bustling with families searching for everything from washing machines to winter coats, now faced closure. Parking lots that had been full every weekend would soon be empty. Lights that had glowed warm and welcoming would soon go dark forever. But this wasn't just the story of a company dying. This was the fall of an empire that had changed how Americans lived, shopped, and dreamed for more than a century. And at the heart of that empire stood a building so massive, so revolutionary, that when it was completed in 1906, people called it the largest commercial structure on Earth. A warehouse complex in Chicago that stretched across 40 acres of prairie land, where 22,000 people worked under one roof, processing orders that arrived by telegraph and departed by railroad. Inside those brick walls, beneath classical columns and beside a 14-story tower that touched the clouds, the modern world was being built one catalog page at a time. Orders came in from farmhouses in Iowa, ranches in Montana, mining towns in Colorado. And from this single building, packages went out by the hundreds of thousands, carrying dreams wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. To understand how it all came crashing down, how an empire that seemed eternal could vanish like morning fog, we need to go back to the beginning, back to a lonely railroad station in Minnesota, and a young man who saw golden opportunity where others saw only refused merchandise. His name was Richard Warren Sears, and he was born on December 7th, 1863, in a small town called Stewartville, Minnesota, in a modest house that smelled of wood smoke and his father's forge. His father was a blacksmith and wagon maker, a man whose powerful hands could shape hot iron into horseshoes and wheels. For years, the family prospered. The sound of hammer on anvil rang through their days like a promise of security. But fortune, as it often does, turned cruel without warning. Richard's father lost everything in a failed farm venture. About $50,000 vanished into bad investments and worse luck, swallowed by poor soil and bad weather and schemes that never bore fruit. The hammer fell silent. The forge grew cold, and when Richard was just 17 years old, still more boy than man, his father passed away, leaving behind a widow and children with nothing but debt and fading memories of better times. The boy had no choice. His mother needed support. His sisters needed food. He needed to work, and quickly. He learned telegraphy, mastering the mysterious language of dots and dashes that traveled along copper wires like lightning captured and tamed. It was the cutting-edge communication technology of his time, and it opened doors. He found a job with the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway, and they sent him to North Redwood Falls, a tiny outpost where trains stopped twice a day and messages clicked through the telegraph wires like mechanical whispers. It was lonely work, standing on wooden platforms in the Minnesota cold, watching trains arrive and depart, carrying goods and people to destinations he could only imagine from the names that clattered across his telegraph key. Boston, New York, San Francisco, Chicago. Names that seemed impossibly far from the empty prairie around him. But Richard Sears had a restless mind that never stopped working. He watched the trains with the intensity of a man studying scripture. He observed how goods moved across the country, how the railroad was stitching America together with iron rails and steam power. And then, in 1886, something happened that would change his life forever. A local jeweler refused a shipment of gold-filled pocket watches. The wholesaler had pulled an old scam, shipping unwanted merchandise and then offering it at a discount when the retailer refused delivery. But the jeweler in North Redwood Falls knew the trick and turned the watches away. Richard saw something else. He saw opportunity glittering like gold in those refused timepieces. He contacted the wholesaler and made a deal. He would take the watches and keep any profit above $12 each. Then he did something brilliant. He sent telegrams down the railway line to other station agents, offering them watches for $14 each. The watches sold like wildfire. Station agents loved them. Passengers bought them eagerly. Within 6 months, Richard had made $5,000. That was more money than most men earned in 5 years. At age 22, he left the railroad and moved to Minneapolis to start the R.W. Sears Watch Company. From the very beginning, Richard Sears understood something that others didn't. He knew how to talk to people. He wrote advertisements that didn't just describe products. They told stories. They made promises. They spoke directly to farmers and small-town families who felt forgotten by the big city merchants. His words were warm, personal, persuasive. In 1887, he moved his operation to Chicago, the great railway hub of the Midwest, where goods from all across America converged. There, he hired a quiet watchmaker named Alva Curtis Roebuck to repair returned merchandise. Roebuck was everything Sears wasn't: careful, methodical, technically skilled. Together they made an odd pair, and on September 16, 1893, they officially renamed their company Sears, Roebuck and Company. The first catalog was humble, just watches and jewelry. But Richard Sears had bigger dreams. By 1894, the catalog had exploded to 507 pages. Sewing machines, bicycles, sporting goods, clothing, musical instruments, even early automobiles. Anything a household might need, Richard put it in his catalog, and rural America, starved for choice and convenience, embraced it with open arms. But success brought problems. Richard Sears was a promotional genius, but he was a terrible businessman. Orders piled up faster than they could be filled. The warehouse became chaos, returns flooded in. Cash flow became a nightmare. By 1895, the company was drowning. Alva Roebuck, overwhelmed and exhausted, wanted out. He sold his share for $75,000 to 2 men, Aaron Nussbaum and his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenwald. Julius Rosenwald was born on August 12, 1862, in Springfield, Illinois, just 1 block from Abraham Lincoln's home. His parents were German Jewish immigrants who ran a clothing store. Julius grew up watching his father serve customers with honesty and integrity. Unlike Richard Sears, who dreamed in headlines and promises, Julius Rosenwald thought in systems and organization. He understood manufacturing, supply chains, and employee management. When he looked at Sears, Roebuck and Company, he didn't see chaos. He saw potential. Within months, Rosenwald began transforming the company. He brought order to the warehouse. He established quality controls. He insisted on honest merchandise and fair dealing. While Richard Sears wrote the catalogs that brought in orders, Julius Rosenwald built the systems that fulfilled them. The partnership was electric. By 1903, they had bought out Nussbaum for $1.3 million, and the company belonged to just 2 men, the dreamer and the builder. But they both knew they needed something more. They needed space. Massive, revolutionary space. The kind of building that had never been built before. In 1905, Construction began on what would become the Sears, Roebuck and Company complex in a neighborhood called North Lawndale on Chicago's west side. The architects were Nimmons and Fellows, and the vision was audacious. 40 acres of land, a main merchandise building that would eventually span 3.3 million square feet. A 14-story tower rising from its eastern facade like a cathedral of commerce. The building would be designed in the classical revival style, with ornate detailing that made it look more like a palace than a warehouse. But beneath the beauty was pure efficiency. This wasn't just a building. It was a machine. When the Sears complex opened in 1906, it was unlike anything America had ever seen. Even people who had visited the great exhibitions and World's Fairs stood speechless before it. The main merchandise building stretched across 2 entire city blocks, a monument of brick and ambition rising from what had recently been empty prairie. Inside, an army of workers moved through carefully designed corridors like blood cells flowing through a living organism, each person assigned to a specific task in the great chain of order fulfillment. The building hummed with purpose. Telegraphs clattered with incoming orders from every corner of America, the sound like rain on a tin roof, constant and hypnotic. Workers pulled items from shelves organized by a revolutionary numerical system, so precise that any product among hundreds of thousands could be located in mere seconds. A man could start work in the morning, never having seen a particular item, and by afternoon, after consulting the reference cards, he could walk directly to it without hesitation. Conveyor belts, a stunning innovation borrowed from the Chicago meatpacking plants, carried goods to packing stations where skilled workers wrapped each item with care. These weren't just packages. They were promises being kept. Parcels were wrapped in brown paper, addressed in careful handwriting or typewriter, and loaded onto trains that pulled directly into the building's railroad depot, steam hissing and wheels screeching as they arrived. From order to shipment, the entire process could take less than 24 hours, a miracle of logistics that seemed almost magical to customers accustomed to waiting weeks for mail-order goods. Outside, the 14-story merchandise tower dominated the skyline like a lighthouse guiding ships to harbor, visible for miles across the flat Chicago prairie. Its upper floors glowed at night, lit by thousands of electric bulbs, a beacon of progress in a city that prided itself on innovation. Atop that tower, something magical happened that would change American culture. In later years, radio station WLS would broadcast from the 11th floor. WLS stood for World's Largest Store, and its signal carried Sears' message across the Midwest and beyond. Gene Autry sang cowboy songs from that tower. Millions of Americans tuned in, and every broadcast reminded them where to shop. But the tower was just the beginning. The complex had its own power plant, a brick structure disguised as a medieval-style building, generating 7,000 horsepower just to heat, light, and ventilate the vast interior. That was more power than some entire towns used. The complex had its own fire department, with volunteer firefighters and early sprinkler systems. It had its own police force with armed officers patrolling the grounds. There was a 200,000-gallon water tank for fire prevention. The complex even had its own hospital for treating injured workers. 3 cafeterias served breakfast and lunch to thousands of employees, originally segregated by gender and rank, offering 3 meals a day for just 35 cents. A private bank on site helped employees manage their money. This wasn't just a warehouse. It was a city within a city. 22,000 people worked there at its peak, more than lived in many American towns. They came from every corner of Chicago: Irish, Polish, Italian, African American, German. The complex was a melting pot of ambition and hard work. Many employees lived just a short walk away in North Lawndale, turning the neighborhood into a thriving community where everyone knew someone who worked at Sears. For these workers, Sears wasn't just a job, it was stability. It was pride. Fathers worked there for decades and brought their sons to join them. Women found opportunities in clerical work and order processing. The company offered something revolutionary for its time, a profit-sharing plan, designed partly by Julius Rosenwald, that let employees share in the company's success. By 1906, the same year the complex opened, Sears took another bold step. The company went public in what became the first major retail initial public offering in American financial history. The stock was offered under the ticker symbol S, simple and memorable. The money raised, $40 million, paid for the new complex and expansion across the country. And in 1924, Sears was added to the Dow Jones Industrial Average, cementing its place among America's most important companies. It would remain there for 75 years, a symbol of stability and American prosperity. Meanwhile, the catalog kept growing. By the early 1900s, it had become known as the Wish Book, a magical tome that arrived at farmhouses across America, showing everything a family could desire. Children would spend hours flipping through its pages, dreaming of toys and bicycles. Mothers ordered dresses and kitchen tools. Fathers found hammers, saws, and even entire build-it-yourself homes. Yes, homes. Starting in 1908, Sears sold mail-order house kits, complete with lumber, nails, and instructions, shipped by rail to anywhere in America. Thousands of Sears catalog homes still stand today, monuments to a time when you could order your dream house from a book. The catalog was more than merchandise. It was education. Rural families who had never traveled to a city could see the latest fashions, learn about new technologies, understand what modern life looked like. A farmer's wife in Kansas might never visit Chicago, but through the catalog, Chicago came to her. She could see the same dress a city woman wore, buy the same coffee percolator used in urban kitchens, read about electric irons even if her own home still lacked electricity. The catalog taught people to read better, to calculate prices, to imagine possibilities beyond their immediate circumstances. It showed children that the world was bigger than their small towns. For immigrant families, the catalog became a Rosetta Stone for understanding American consumer culture. Pictures showed how products worked, what they were for, how they fit into American domestic life. A Polish mother who spoke little English could point to a picture of a sewing machine, and her children would understand what she wanted. The catalog bridged language barriers, social barriers, geographic barriers. It was democracy in print, offering the same products to everyone whether they lived in a Fifth Avenue mansion or a Montana homestead. And the prices were fair. Julius Rosenwald insisted on that. Unlike city stores that might charge whatever they thought a customer would pay, Sears charged everyone the same. The catalog promised satisfaction or money back, revolutionary at a time when many merchants considered all sales final. This wasn't just good business. It was building trust across an entire nation, one transaction at a time. But behind the success, there were shadows. Richard Sears, the man who started it all, was burning out. His health was failing. He had struggled with alcoholism, and his body was paying the price. He also clashed repeatedly with Julius Rosenwald over the advertising budget. Sears wanted to spend more, always more, pushing the boundaries of promotional excess. Rosenwald wanted restraint and fiscal responsibility. By 1908, at just 44 years old, Richard Sears resigned as president and retired to a farm north of Chicago. He tried to rest, but his health continued to decline. On September 28, 1914, Richard Warren Sears passed away in Waukesha, Wisconsin. He was only 50 years old. The cause of death was Bright's disease, a kidney condition, worsened by years of excessive drinking. The man who had built an empire from refused watches left behind a fortune, but he also left behind a body worn down by the pressures of relentless ambition. His funeral was attended by thousands, but the company he created barely paused. Julius Rosenwald, now firmly in control, continued building the empire, and Sears, Roebuck and Company kept growing. The catalog reached into every corner of America. 300 million catalogs were published in the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Nearly half of American families shopped from those pages. For people in rural areas, far from department stores and specialty shops, the catalog was a lifeline to the modern world. Then came a turning point. In 1925, on February 2nd, Sears opened its first retail store. Where? Right there at the North Lawndale complex. It was an experiment. Conventional wisdom said that stores should be located in downtown shopping districts, near the wealthy and fashionable. But Sears put its store in a working-class neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The strategy worked brilliantly. Customers loved being able to see and touch the merchandise before buying. Streetcar lines brought shoppers from across Chicago. The success of that first store sparked a revolution. Soon, Sears was opening retail locations across the country, often in unconventional locations, pioneering the suburban retail model that would later define American shopping. But even as retail stores grew, the catalog remained king, and the heart of it all was still that massive complex in North Lawndale, where the machinery of American commerce hummed day and night. Julius Rosenwald, meanwhile, was transforming into one of America's greatest philanthropists. When the company faced near collapse during the recession after World War I, Rosenwald did something shocking. He personally pledged $21 million of his own fortune to save the company and protect employees' jobs. That's equivalent to nearly $300 million today. Business leaders across America were stunned. Newspapers hailed it as business philanthropy, a new model of corporate responsibility. Rosenwald didn't just save Sears. He also gave away more than $60 million during his lifetime to causes he believed in, particularly African American education. Working with Booker T. Washington, he funded the construction of over 5,000 schools across the American South, the Rosenwald schools, which provided education to black children during the era of segregation. He established the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. He supported universities, medical research, and Jewish charities. When Julius Rosenwald died on January 6, 1932, at age 69, his death made the front page of the New York Times under the headline, "Rosenwald Dead, Nation Mourns Him." He had insisted that his foundation spend all its money within 25 years of his death, rather than exist forever as a perpetual endowment. He believed each generation should solve its own problems. True to his wishes, the Rosenwald Fund closed in 1948, having spent every dollar on making the world better. By the middle of the 20th century, Sears had reached heights that seemed impossible. In 1969, the company's sales represented 1% of the entire United States economy. Think about that. One company, 1% of everything Americans bought and sold. 2 out of every 3 Americans shopped at Sears. It wasn't just a store, it was a national institution. The catalog, the retail stores, the iconic brands, Craftsman tools that fathers passed down to sons, Kenmore appliances that lasted for decades, die-hard batteries that never seemed to quit. Sears wasn't just selling products, it was selling reliability, quality, and the American dream. But empires, no matter how mighty, carry the seeds of their own decline. And for Sears, those seeds were already germinating. The company had grown so large, so comfortable, that it began to believe its dominance was permanent. And then, in 1973, something happened that would symbolize the beginning of the end. The company built a new headquarters downtown, the Sears Tower, later renamed Willis Tower, which became the tallest building in the world. It was a monument to corporate power, 110 stories of steel and glass soaring above Chicago's skyline. And when the executives moved into their new tower, they left behind the North Lawndale complex. The building that had been the heart of Sears for 67 years was suddenly empty. 22,000 jobs vanished from the neighborhood almost overnight. North Lawndale, which had thrived on the wages and energy of Sears workers, went into economic freefall. Stores closed. Property values plummeted. The community that had been built around the catalog empire began to crumble. The massive warehouse buildings stood mostly empty, slowly deteriorating as the neighborhood struggled to survive. But leaving North Lawndale was just a symptom of deeper problems. Sears had built its empire on the catalog, on bringing products to people who couldn't easily shop elsewhere. But by the 1970s and 80s, America was changing. People were moving to suburbs where shopping malls offered dozens of stores under one roof. Cars were everywhere, making it easy to drive to competitors. And then came the discount retailers. Walmart opened its first store in 1962 and grew by offering lower prices than anyone else. By buying in massive quantities and running ultra-efficient operations, Walmart could undercut Sears on price for nearly everything. Target, Home Depot, and other big-box stores followed the same model. Suddenly, Sears wasn't the low-price leader anymore. On the other end, specialty retailers began stealing Sears customers. The Gap offered trendy clothing that made Sears fashion departments look boring and outdated. Best Buy offered electronics with better selection and knowledgeable staff. Sears was caught in the middle. Too expensive to compete with Walmart, too bland to compete with specialty stores. The company tried to adapt, but it moved slowly. Committees debated. Executives hesitated. Meanwhile, competitors moved fast and aggressive. Then came the internet. In the 1990s, as America went online, a new company called Amazon began selling books through a website. At first, it seemed like a quirky experiment. But Amazon's founder understood something that Sears had forgotten. The future belonged to whoever made shopping easiest. Amazon expanded from books to everything, creating a digital catalog that made Sears's paper version look ancient. Ironically, Sears had invented the model that Amazon perfected: the catalog, the warehouse, the efficient fulfillment system. Everything Amazon did, Sears had pioneered a century earlier. But while Amazon invested billions in technology, website design, and lightning-fast shipping, Sears barely tried. The company did launch a website, but it was clunky, slow, and hard to use. While competitors like Target and Walmart poured money into e-commerce, Sears spent almost nothing. According to reports, in 2017, Sears spent roughly 91 cents per square foot on upgrades to its stores and online presence. Meanwhile, Kohl's spent $8.12 per square foot, and Best Buy spent $15.36. Sears was starving its own business. Why? The answer lies in what happened in 2005. A hedge fund manager named Eddie Lampert, who had made billions in financial markets, bought Sears through his company Kmart Holding for $11 billion. He merged Sears with Kmart, another struggling retailer, hoping to create a powerhouse that could fight Walmart and Amazon. Instead, he created a disaster. Lampert believed he could run Sears like a financial portfolio rather than a retail business. He cut costs relentlessly. He closed stores. He sold off valuable assets to raise cash. He treated the company's famous brands, Craftsman, Kenmore, Die Hard, as assets to be monetized rather than businesses to be grown. In 2017, Sears sold the Craftsman brand, its most iconic toolmaker, to Stanley Black & Decker for $900 million. The brand that generations of American fathers had trusted was gone. While Lampert extracted cash through asset sales and financial engineering, he refused to invest in what mattered, the stores themselves. Customers walking into Sears locations in the 2010s found depressing experiences that felt like walking through retail hospice. The lights were dim to save on electricity bills, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even new merchandise look tired and old. The carpets were stained and worn, threadbare paths visible where countless feet had walked over the decades. In some stores, you could see the carpet pattern only at the edges near the walls, while the center aisles were worn down to backing. Shelves were half empty because suppliers, worried about Sears' ability to pay its bills, stopped shipping merchandise or demanded cash up front. Walking down an aisle, customers would see gaps where products should be, like teeth missing from a smile. Paint peeled from walls in strips, revealing older colors underneath, archaeological layers of Sears' decline. Bathrooms were dirty, often lacking soap or paper towels, with tiles cracked and grout blackened with mold. The stores felt like they were dying because they were, slowly suffocating from neglect and underinvestment. In the break rooms, employees whispered to each other during their shifts, sharing rumors about store closings, wondering if their location would be next, if they would wake up one morning to find their jobs gone. Some had worked at Sears for 20 years, 30 years, their entire adult lives. They remembered when the stores were busy, when customers lined up at Christmas, when working at Sears meant something, carried prestige. Now they felt embarrassment. Their friends asked why they still worked there. Their families worried. But many had nowhere else to go. No other skills marketable in a changing economy. They were trapped, watching their livelihoods crumble like the buildings around them. Employees, demoralized and underpaid, stopped caring. Why would they? The company clearly didn't care about them. Many retail brands refused to sell through Sears anymore because they didn't want their products associated with such shabby stores. In a 2016 survey, female shoppers said they preferred shopping at Goodwill thrift stores over Sears for clothing. That's how far the company had fallen. Meanwhile, Eddie Lampert kept insisting that Sears was making progress, that his plan was working. But the numbers told a different story. Sales dropped year after year. Losses piled into the billions. Debt mounted higher and higher. The company's stock price, once a symbol of American stability, collapsed to nearly worthless. By 2017, Sears was closing hundreds of stores. By early 2018, it was clear the end was near. The company had just 700 stores left and employed only 68,000 people. At its peak decades earlier, Sears had operated over 3,500 stores with over 350,000 employees. The empire had shrunk to a shadow. And then came October 15th, 2018. The date will live in retail history, like a tombstone marking the death of an era. Sears Holdings filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court in New York in the early morning hours. The filing arriving like a death certificate for what had once been America's most beloved retailer. The filing revealed debts of $11.3 billion, a mountain of obligations that could never be climbed, never be conquered. Eddie Lampert stepped down as CEO, though he remained chairman, still clinging to control even as the empire disintegrated in his hands. The company announced it would close at least 142 more stores by the end of the year, doors shutting just as the holiday shopping season approached. For workers, the news was devastating beyond measure. 70,000 people faced unemployment, their paychecks about to stop, their health insurance about to vanish, their routine shattered. Many were older employees who had devoted their entire careers to Sears, believing in the company's promises of stability, loyalty rewarded with loyalty. They had watched their own parents work at Sears, had brought their children to visit Santa Claus in the stores, had used their employee discounts to furnish homes and buy gifts. Now those promises were ashes, worthless as yesterday's newspaper. Store managers received phone calls in the middle of the night, instructed to prepare for liquidation. They arrived at dawn to find liquidation companies already there, ready to strip the stores like vultures on a carcass, to mark down everything and sell it off. Employees came to work not knowing if this would be their last day, not knowing if they would even receive their final paychecks. Some cried in the break rooms, others moved through their shifts in numb silence, straightening merchandise that would soon be gone, helping customers who asked when the store would close, offering scripted reassurances that rang hollow in their own ears. For the communities where Sears stores operated, the closings left vacant buildings haunting shopping centers like empty eye sockets, lost tax revenue that forced cuts to schools and services, and fewer shopping options that sent customers driving further for basics. In small towns where Sears had been the only department store, the closure left elderly residents with nowhere to buy clothes or appliances without traveling 50 miles or more. In suburban malls, the empty Sears anchor store marked the beginning of mall death spirals, other retailers fleeing as foot traffic disappeared, until whole malls stood abandoned, monuments to retail's golden age now converted to homeless shelters or demolished for housing. The ripple effects spread wider than anyone predicted. Companies that had supplied Sears for generations went bankrupt themselves. Delivery companies lost major contracts. Advertising agencies lost their biggest client. Small manufacturers who had depended on Sears orders for decades were forced to close their factories, laying off workers, ending family businesses that had spanned 3 or 4 generations. In some cases, entire product categories that Sears had invented or popularized began to disappear. The catalog showroom concept that Sears pioneered largely died with the company. The idea of a general merchandise store where you could buy tools, appliances, clothes, toys, and automotive supplies under one roof faded as specialty retailers took over. Even the concept of brand loyalty, the idea that you would buy the same brand of tools your father used, began to erode in a world where products became disposable and companies became less trustworthy. The bankruptcy process was brutal. Lampert's hedge fund submitted a bid to buy Sears for $5.2 billion and try to keep some stores open. Creditors fought over the remaining assets like vultures over a carcass. Some stores were liquidated immediately, their merchandise sold at deep discounts until the shelves were bare and the lights went dark. After years of legal wrangling, Sears officially emerged from bankruptcy in October of 2022. But it emerged as a shell. Only about 20 stores remained open, The company that had once been America's largest retailer was reduced to a handful of locations scattered across the country. Today, those few remaining Sears stores feel like museums. Walking through their aisles is like stepping into the past, surrounded by ghosts of what used to be. Everything about them feels outdated, from the layout to the merchandise to the fluorescent lighting. Retail experts predict they won't survive much longer. The Sears brand, once synonymous with quality and trust, has become a cautionary tale taught in business schools around the world. What happened to Sears? The simple answer is that it failed to adapt. It failed to invest in its stores when Walmart was building supercenters. It failed to embrace the internet when Amazon was revolutionizing shopping. It failed to modernize when Target was creating stylish, appealing retail experiences. But the deeper answer is more painful. Sears forgot what had made it great. Richard Sears understood that business was about connecting with customers, understanding their needs, and making their lives better. Julius Rosenwald understood that success required continuous investment, honest dealing, and treating employees as partners rather than expenses. Eddie Lampert understood only numbers on a spreadsheet. He saw a company to be harvested, not built. He cut costs instead of creating value. He extracted wealth instead of investing in the future. And what about that magnificent warehouse complex in North Lawndale? The building that had once been the largest commercial structure on Earth. In 1978, it was designated a National Historic Landmark in recognition of its architectural and historical significance. But by then, most of the complex was already abandoned. The massive merchandise building, all 3 million square feet of it, stood empty for years. Eventually, it was demolished. The site became part of a redevelopment project called Homan Square. The land where 22,000 people once worked was carved up for new housing and businesses, but a few pieces survived. The 14-story merchandise tower still stands, a lonely sentinel watching over a neighborhood that has changed dramatically. The administration building, with its ornate classical details, was preserved and repurposed. The power plant, that brick structure that once generated 7,000 horsepower, was transformed into the Charles H. Shaw Technology and Learning Center, a LEED Platinum certified renovation that brought new life to old stone. The buildings that remain have been adapted, renovated, and put to new uses, but they stand as reminders of what was lost. Walking through North Lawndale today, you can still sense the ghost of what the neighborhood once was. The streets where 22,000 Sears workers walked to their shifts every morning, lunchboxes in hand. The homes where families built their lives around stable jobs and good wages. The corner stores and restaurants that thrived on Sears money. The churches where Sears families worshipped. All of that vanished when Sears moved downtown in 1973, and the neighborhood has struggled ever since, never fully recovering from the wound of losing its economic heart. Property values collapsed almost overnight. Banks stopped lending in the neighborhood. Stores closed because their customer base disappeared. Schools lost funding as property tax revenue declined. The neighborhood that had been built on Sears's success began a long decline that mirrored the company's own trajectory. Today, North Lawndale has lower median income, higher unemployment, and more vacant properties than almost any Chicago neighborhood. The story of Sears is the story of American capitalism in miniature. The rise, innovation, hard work, and visionary leadership building something that improved millions of lives. The peak, dominance so complete it seemed eternal, 1% of the entire economy. And the fall, complacency, short-term thinking, and financial engineering destroying what generations had built. There are lessons here, painful ones that echo across time and industry. The first is that no empire lasts forever, no matter how mighty it seems at its peak. Companies that dominate their era, that seem as permanent as mountains, can collapse within a single generation. The fall of Sears joins the fall of other giants. Montgomery Ward, which outlasted Sears' founding by decades, but closed in 2001. Woolworths, once operating thousands of five and dime stores, now vanished except in memory. A&P, which dominated grocery retail for 50 years, bankrupt and gone. Each believed itself eternal. Each was wrong. The second lesson is that success breeds the most dangerous form of complacency. When you're on top of the world, commanding 1% of the entire economy, serving 2/3 of all Americans, it's psychologically impossible to believe you could fall. The signals of decline seem like temporary setbacks. Competition seems manageable. Warning signs get dismissed. This is especially true when success has lasted for decades, when the company has survived previous challenges, when the brand seems unshakable. Sears survived the Great Depression, World War II, multiple recessions. Why would anyone believe the internet or Walmart could bring it down? Yet they did, precisely because Sears believed itself invincible. The third lesson cuts deeper. A company is never just a financial asset to be optimized, leveraged, and harvested. It's a living ecosystem of people, relationships, communities, and trust built over generations. When Eddie Lampert treated Sears as a collection of assets whose value could be extracted through financial engineering, he killed the organism while trying to profit from selling its organs. The employees who gave their working lives to Sears, the suppliers who depended on its orders, the communities built around its stores, the customers who trusted its brands. All of these were relationships, not line items on a balance sheet. When you destroy those relationships for short-term financial gain, you destroy the very thing that made the company valuable. No amount of clever financial maneuvering can replace decades of earned trust. The fourth is that adaptation isn't optional in business or in life. The world changes whether you like it or not, whether you're ready or not. The catalog was revolutionary in 1906. It was obsolete by 2006. Sears invented the model that Amazon perfected, the idea of centralized warehouses shipping products nationwide based on printed catalogs. But when the internet transformed that catalog from paper to pixels, when warehouses became algorithmic, when shipping became overnight, Sears clung desperately to the past. The company that had pioneered mail-order retail couldn't make the leap to online retail, even though the concepts were nearly identical. Why? Because adaptation requires more than understanding what needs to change. It requires the courage to abandon what made you successful, to cannibalize your own business model before someone else does it for you. Sears couldn't bear to kill the catalog that had built its empire, even as that catalog became irrelevant. The company couldn't invest in e-commerce when it might hurt store sales, even as both were dying. Fear of change guaranteed destruction. The fifth lesson is perhaps the most important. Leadership matters. Richard Sears had vision but lacked discipline. Julius Rosenwald had discipline and added vision. Together, they built an empire. Eddie Lampert had neither vision nor discipline, only financial cleverness. And under his leadership, the empire crumbled. Today, when young people hear the name Sears, many don't even know what it was. To them, it's just another failed store, like Borders or Circuit City or Toys R Us. They don't know that for their grandparents, Sears was where you bought your first bicycle, your wedding dishes, your family's first television. They don't understand that the Sears catalog was how rural America connected to the modern world, how isolated families saw and ordered the same products city dwellers enjoyed. They can't imagine a time when one company was so dominant that its sales equaled 1% of the entire United States economy, when 2 out of 3 Americans shopped there regularly, when the Sears catalog was called the Wish Book because it contained everything you could wish for. They don't know what it felt like to wait for the catalog to arrive in the mail, to gather the family around the kitchen table and flip through its pages together, planning purchases and dreaming about products that seemed impossibly luxurious. They've never experienced the thrill of going to Sears on a Saturday morning, the parking lot full of cars, the automatic doors whooshing open, the smell of popcorn from the snack bar mixing with the scent of new merchandise. They never stood in line at the catalog desk, filling out order forms with a stubby pencil, waiting while the clerk checked if the item was in stock. They never experienced the satisfaction of buying Craftsman tools with a lifetime warranty, knowing that your son or grandson could return them decades later, and Sears would honor that promise. They never understood what it meant when someone said their appliances were all Kenmore, a statement of both quality and thrift, practical American values embodied in white enamel and chrome. To them, shopping has always meant Amazon and Walmart, clicks and carts, algorithms suggesting products based on browsing history. The idea of a company that sold everything, that Americans trusted implicitly, that connected rural and urban America through paper and promise, seems as ancient as covered wagons, and they'll never see that magnificent warehouse complex as it was in its glory days. 40 acres of bustling activity where the American dream was packaged and shipped. They'll never hear the symphony of industry that filled that building. Telegraph keys clicking their Morse code messages, conveyor belts rumbling with packages, workers calling to each other across vast rooms, trains whistling as they pulled into the depot, the hum of the power plant generating enough electricity to run a small city. They'll never see 22,000 workers streaming out of the building at the end of a shift, filling the streets of North Lawndale, heading home to houses they could afford because Sears paid decent wages, stopping at local shops that thrived because Sears brought money into the neighborhood. They'll never understand what it meant to work there, to be part of something bigger than yourself, to know that the package you wrapped might bring joy to a child in Montana or help a farmer in Iowa repair his equipment or allow a family in Alabama to own their first washing machine. Every package was more than cardboard and merchandise. It was connection, possibility, and the promise that America worked for everyone, not just the wealthy in big cities. All of that is gone now. The empire collapsed. The stores closed. The jobs disappeared. The brands were sold off. The warehouse was demolished. What remains? A few aging buildings in North Lawndale, repurposed and renovated. A handful of stores that won't last much longer. Memories in the minds of older Americans who remember when Sears meant quality and trust. And lessons, hard lessons, about how even the mightiest can fall. Perhaps that's the real value of the Sears story now, not as a tale of triumph, though there was triumph in those early days when Richard Sears sold watches from a railroad platform and built an empire. Not as a tale of villainy, though there were villains who extracted wealth while destroying value, but as a reminder that nothing is permanent, that every empire eventually crumbles, that the future belongs to those who adapt and invest and build, not to those who rest on past glories or extract value without creating it. The next time you see one of those few remaining Sears stores, windows dusty and parking lots empty, or drive past Merchandise Tower in North Lawndale like a tombstone over a vanished world, or hold a craftsman tool made before the brand was sold. It's not just a store or a building or a tool. It's a monument to American ambition, innovation, and the relentless march of time that eventually humbles us all.